Welcome back to Black Girl World Traveler, the podcast. I'm your host, Shira, and today we have a special guest, Cher Terais. And I'm so excited for you all to learn more about Cher Terais, the author. So, Cher Terais is the ultimate Renaissance woman with a passion for travel and an eye for gorgeous interior design and architecture. She's crafted beautiful stories centered around Black love and its complexities. Take a journey with her from busy street markets to distant escapes in her debut novel, Bali Blue. Originally from Warner Robins, Georgia, Cher spent time in the Army before moving to the Middle East as a program manager. Her travels allowed her to dive into diverse cultures and served as a springboard for more trips around Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Europe. A proud mother of two daughters and one grandson, Cher encourages them to pursue their dreams with no limits. Cher can be found on her social media at Cher_Terais to learn more about this amazing author who calls the suburbs of Atlanta her home. Welcome, Cher.
Hello,
Hello,
everyone,
everyone,
and thank
and
you for
thank you for
having me.
having me. I'm so excited that you're here to talk to our Black Girl World Travelers about your life, about your books, and of course, about your travel. So, can you start off by sharing with the listeners a little bit more about where you grew up and how that informed your life today?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So,
Warner Robins,
Warner Robins.
Georgia is home of the third largest Air Force base in the world. And so my dad was in the Air Force, and I honestly believe the international city kind of sparked for me this passion to understand different cultures. It's a very small city, by the way, just south of Macon, Georgia. And of course, if anyone were to ask me where I was from outside of Georgia, as most people say, oh, Atlanta. I never do that. It's always Warner Robins, and I'm proud of that history simply because, like I said, it started a legacy of understanding different cultures. It is indeed called the International City, and it kind of shaped who I am today. It shaped me, yeah.
So now you said it's home to the third largest Air Force base in the world. You, however, were in the Army. So
Army.
can you tell? So can you tell us a little bit about your decision to enroll and enlist in the Army, and your reasoning for that?
Yep. So my entire family is a military family. Like I said, my dad started out Air Force. I have two brothers and sisters who were in the Army. I have an older sister who was also in the Navy, a daughter who was in the Navy, a multitude of cousins who were across all branches of service. I chose the Army simply because it was the easiest route for me to go as a young mother, a single mother. And that's not my story. However, again, the Army, though, was a stepping stone, honestly, for starting out my travel, starting out my career as a project program manager, starting out my career in interior design. They paid for me to go to college. And again, I had a plan when I went in. It was the ultimate, what's the word I'm trying to say? It was the ultimate cheat code to life for me. So, yeah, I chose the Army simply because I believed in the motto. But again, it was also easier for me as a single mother to enlist as opposed to other branches.
Got you. So I know that you were a project manager in the Army. You had your career. Where did your love of writing start, and how did you come up with the concept for writing your first book?
Absolutely. So my love of writing started way before I wrote the first book. I started out writing poetry. Around second grade, I think I won my first poetry award. I just shared with someone the other day, and I'm really telling you my age right now, but that poem was around the Challenger space shuttle explosion. Exactly. So I was in the second grade then, and we were, charged with, of course, writing these poems in memoriam to the lost astronauts from that shuttle explosion. And I won an award. And that second grade teacher kind of pushed me in the direction of journalism, actually. And so going through high school or middle school, high school, I actually planned to be a wartime correspondent. and journalist. And so, linking that to the Army, of course, I didn't become a correspondent, nor did I become a journalist, by the way, but I continued to write. Second and third poems were published around the age of 18, 19. And then I started trying to write my first book probably around the age of 20 and quickly realized I had no idea what I was doing. That's a big leap from poetry to a novel. and so I kind of gave up on that, but then opened a bookstore. So I've owned a bookstore and dedicated it to the types of authors that I like to read: Black authors, Asian authors, Latin American or Latino authors, and Native American or indigenous people of the United States. And so I kind of went very niche very early, and it was a total success. And then I indeed had to go to the Middle East. And so a very successful bookstore, I kind of let go to the wayside simply because I had bigger aspirations to go further and explore the world. And so it's all really connected. I never really tied the dots all the way to my dad being in the military, growing up in Warner Robins. Then, of course, joining the military myself and how that was kind of the springboard or catalyst to my passion for travel and writing. And so now I get to merge those things together. And so I think your follow-on question was, how did I get to writing that first book? Finally, around 2018, I decided that I was going to go to Bali. I also knew that the purpose of that trip was to do research to write my first book, which I knew was going to be fiction, but because I was so into being immersed into a culture, and I had so many friends, so many people that would ask me all the time. First of all, the question always was, hey, not how are you doing, but hey, are you in the country? So it got to be that kind of thing. And then, of course, they would always say, I wish I could travel like that. And it would always boil down to lack of resources or lack of time, which is a major resource. And so what I decided was, I'm going to start writing books that immerse people into these cultures. So even if you can't go, you can pick up one of my books, the first one being Bali Blue. You can pick it up and you can be immersed in the culture, the food, the richness of Bali. And let's not forget the love story, because it is a romance.
All right, so before we talk about Bali and Blue and sort of the plot, I want I want to go back to you owning that bookstore. A lot of our Black world travelers aspiring entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs. Tell us a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey in owning that bookstore, and where was the bookstore?
It was totally online, starting at around 2005 to 2008. That was the extent of the bookstore, and it was called Ink Slingers Online. And again, it was a dedication to the types of authors and cultures I liked to read about. At that time, I had no idea about brand marketing or niching down or any of that. Again, it was literally an ode to what I liked to read and the difficulty that I experienced walking into a Barnes and Noble or a Books a Million and trying to find the newest Eric Jerome Dickey book that came out, or the newest J.D. Mason book that came out. I could never find them. And so I decided one day, I can go straight to the distributor. And if I can go straight to the distributor, then I'm sure that I can solve a problem that other people are having just like me. And everybody I knew was avid readers, so I knew it was a challenge. And so I thought to solve a problem even back then. Yeah.
So, thank you for that. And so now let's go back to Bali Blue. Tell us a little bit about the book. Give us some little sneak peeks
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
into the book, and what were you looking for when you went to Bali to do your research, and how did that research inform the book?
Absolutely. So again, the whole purpose for going to Bali was to research the book. So what I was looking for was that cultural immersion myself. I was there for 10 days by myself. And I wanted to experience the beautiful richness of it by myself without anyone saying, hey, let's go do this, let's go get on Bali swing, or let's go do this. I totally arrived with no agenda. And yep, got there. Of course, I did research on the exchange rate, and of course, how much cash I needed to bring, and what types of weather that I would be experiencing at that time of year. I did all that research, of course, before getting there. But I met the most amazing guy. And we are still really good friends to this day. He was actually the guy who picked me up from the airport, my driver. And I ended up every day hanging with him, and he became my driver, my tour guide, my excursion captain, if you will. And now I consider him my Bali go-to person. And so if anyone ever comes to me and say, hey, I want to go to Bali, I'm connecting them immediately. His name is Nugroho, and everyone calls him Bagus, but he is indeed a character in Bali Blue as well. He actually informed so much about my trip that he got some dedicated page time as well. But yeah, he picked me up. He took me around. He took me to Qatar. He took me to Ubud. He took me to Uluwatu and all these different places and temples. And I got to just experience it, not as a tourist, but as someone who was extremely curious about Bali and what it had to offer. And of course, going there, I had no idea of what the storyline of my book was going to be. I had no idea what the characters' names were going to be. 10 days before I got to Bali, there was an earthquake, like a 7 point something earthquake. It was pretty bad. It didn't hit the island of Bali, but it did hit the island of Lombok. And when I got there, the story started coming together. Okay, there will be this young lady from Atlanta, and 30 something, and she's going through a divorce, and I had to figure out a way. Why did she end up in Bali? And she's going through this divorce at home, and her boss, because normally she's a boss, but her team, her boss is realizing, okay, for the last year, you've been kind of out of it. How about take some time off? And so this consummate workaholic is now forced to have to deal with herself and her stuff. And the day she gets the news from her boss that she needs to take off, she goes home and experiences on CNN the magnitude 7.0 earthquake that is happening. It just so happens she's a vice president of an architectural firm. And so not only is she heartbroken because of these crushed buildings, she's also heartbroken because of this gut-wrenching image of this child reaching for someone in the rubble. And she realized that that was kind of her. She's reaching for something in the rubble, and she's lost her crown. Immediately books a flight to Bali. And so that's how she gets there, and then inserts Kendrick Kekoa, hailing from the beautiful island of Hawaii and CEO of one of the most world famous structural and civil engineering companies, and is used to doing work in that area because, of course, we all know it's the Ring of Fire, lots of earthquakes, right? And so now he's there, and now they have met and they're bumping heads. And this story is an enemies to lovers romance. So they're clashing, and then, of course, the beautiful sparks that they make over the beautiful Bali Blue waters is kind of in why the title is what it is.
That's beautiful. I love it. I love it. I can't wait to read it. For those who are interested in reading this book, where can they find it?
They can find it anywhere books are sold. Bali Blue is actually my first book.
Mm-hmm.
You can find it in Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Audible. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it again anywhere. It is the first book in the Wanderlust romance series. And then following that comes Mess on the Mara, which is book 2. And it's set in Kenya, whole different storyline. And then the third book, which comes out November 14th, is actually set in Tulum, Mexico. Whole nother storyline, but it is interconnected with some of the characters. It's a Wanderlust romance series. However, they're standalone books, so they don't have to be read in any specific order. But I think I do pretty good Easter egg hunt drops of characters who may be formed here, but actually their story is told here. So,
Thank you for this. So, 2 follow-up questions. The first one is, what is Wanderlust? And what is Wanderlust?
So Wanderlust romance, an article came out about me the other day, and they coined me the queen of Wanderlust romance. Wanderlust, just as the word implies, is this extreme desire to travel to somewhere different than where you are. And so I kind of already told you my why of writing books. Wanderlust romance are stories about perfectly imperfect women, especially Black women and brown women, who find themselves in some of the most exotic, stunning places around the world. And they are women from places like Atlanta, like DC, like Savannah, Georgia, even. But again, their stories take them to some of the most stunning places around the world, and yeah, they get to experience all the things that go into what a perfect romance with a happily ever after is, even though I already stated they're perfectly imperfect. You know, they may have gone through a few things, not that that's the center of the story, but I feel like sometimes in romance, we have these perfect whirlwind meetups, and it's like boy meets girl, they fall in love, they have a baby, they get married, have a baby, and that's it. My stories are very rich in character. And so that character development, the story development, location and setting development. A lot of people have told me in Bali Blue, like the setting in and of itself, Bali is a character in the book. So I like to tell the richness of the stories of real people, their strengths, their failures, and then of course it's all gonna end in a happily ever after. You're gonna get that definitely, but you get to see the ups and downs of it as well.
The romance genre.
Ooh, I think really by virtue of where I started reading at a very young age. I already talked about Eric Jerome Dickey at one point. That was my favorite author. And it was so interesting to me that a man could write from such a strongly feminine voice, right? And I thought it was beautiful. And the way he told stories just made me want to be one of those women, right? And so I think romance was a natural genre for me because of it's where I started reading. But interestingly enough, I don't read much romance anymore. I read a lot of Black fantasy. And yeah, it's some really cool Black fantasy books that are out right now.
So we're going to get to the Black fantasy in a moment because that's not a genre that I have really tapped into yet. But I want to talk about. So we have the Wanderlust romance, or the Queen of Wanderlust romance genre. Um, Talk to us about your writing process
Oh yeah,
when
oh
it
yeah.
comes to writing your books.
So usually, like I said, it starts with a location in mind. Every place, every story I write, I've gone to that place to experience it, not necessarily to research it though. I've found really quick that it takes a long time to write a book. And I travel even in between writing the book. For instance, I went to Tulum, Mexico back at the end of 2022 to research for this third book that's coming out November 14th this year. Um, I went to then Aruba, and that's where I wrote a good deal of the book, right? So at the same time that I'm writing Tempest and Tulum in Aruba, I'm still discovering more for new books to come. So my writing process always starts with a location. I'll research the location before I get to the place that I'm writing about, and then characters start developing, storylines start developing as early on as just figuring out, okay, what is this country known for? What are the challenges in this particular place? What are the great things that the culture produces, right? What are the people doing? And that starts telling me, okay, flavor, vibe, okay, what kind of characters do I think would thrive in this space? So that again starts informing my characters. All of this is all in my head, usually until I actually get on ground, and then I'll start outlining the story itself, doing little small character assessments, if you will. I keep a spreadsheet of my characters. How old are they? What do they look like? If it's a guy, how tall is he? Is he muscular? Is he, what is he? What is his skin tone? Is he rough? Is he young? Is he older? That kind of stuff really starts coming out when I get to the location. And then once the characters are developed and the outline is kind of fleshed out, and I usually write it from the chapter 1 all the way through the end, the outline itself. I'll do all that before I even start writing the first word. Now, halfway through the book, the outline usually is out the window. The characters start telling their own story at that point. And so I let it kind of free flow from the middle of the book to the end. I'm also a publisher. And so it's not even just writing the book. It's all the things that come with concept development, all the way through writing the book to all the way through publishing, which is inclusive of editing, re-editing, formatting, packaging, also working with distributors, Ingram Spark, KDP, making sure I know where I want my books to be located at. Is it just going to be online? Is it going to be in hardback, paperback? All of that good stuff, all the way through marketing and promoting the book. So, yeah.
And how long to write each of these 3 books as a part of the series? And is there a name for the series?
Yep, the series is called the Wanderlust Romance Series. Yep. The first book took 3 years. Bali Blue took 3 years. The second book took about a year and a half, and this third book took a little bit less than 6 months. So it's getting quicker. Getting faster.
Yeah, that's amazing to go from 3 years, a year and a half to 6 months. You're basically popping them out now.
Popping them out. I got a process.
So what have been some of the challenges that you faced as a Black Wanderlust romance writer?
I want to say as an indie author. I'll start as an indie author and then kind of hone into a Black romance author. Of course, as an indie author, the onus of all those things that I just talked about, they all have a cost. Of course, the traveling, the time it takes, all time is precious. So I would even put a cost to the time it takes to write the book. All of the marketing, that has a cost. So as an indie author, it's always going to be the balance of how much can I spend to produce this work of art? And let's just call it what it is. It is a creation that is put out to the world and very subjective to other people's opinion, right? That's the only reason we write. It's not for ourselves, it's for others. And so depending on how well it is received by either critics, reviewers, or just average readers, right? That depends on how much money that book is going to produce in revenue. And so you never know that until it's out there in the world. So that's always going to be a challenge, the cost versus the benefit of creating. As a Black romance author, traditional publishing has always kind of relegated Black romance to the box and tried to fit it into whatever box that they wanted to marginalize it to. Is it urban fiction? Is it Black fiction? Is it just romance? Or there's these labels that we have no control over. And so I think a lot of times too, that stepping away from traditional publishing to indie publishing is a huge decision that you have to make. Traditional publishing, they pay for all those things up front for you. And then you stand back and hope and pray that your book is received well. With indie, on the other hand, you do all the work and you reap all the reward if there's reward, or you reap all the risk and loss if there is that too. But I think from a Black romance author, things like from a traditional standpoint, with it being so segmented and marginalized, we've kind of stepped out of that. And it's gotten better, especially with like TikTok, Book Talk, Instagram, and Bookstagram. We get to reach a broader audience, but we all still know as influencers, because now we have to be authors, writers, publishers, influencers, right? We all know that there's a whole lot of people in the pool trying to reach the same audiences, right? And so it's all about reach at this point. And who has the bigger marketing budget sometimes, or who has the biggest fan base, and that kind of dictates who is going to get access to your books too. So those are the challenges. It's still worth the effort of writing because, again, it's all about the creativity of it. And I think there is this renaissance happening with romance right now. I think romance sold 7.2 times higher now than it has historically. People are really into these books, and I'm learning that there are fellow readers and people who are just trying to soak up as much as they can right now. So I'm riding the wave.
Why do you think that there's a renaissance of romance right now? Romance
So
novels.
if you were to talk to any, especially Black romance indie author, I'm talking about Christina C. Jones. If your fans know who she is one of the queens of indie Black romance right now. If you talk to Love Belvin, if you talk to Mel Dow, if you talk to any Black romance independent author, they're going to tell you it is because of Black romance that romance as an entire genre is doing so well right now. Absolutely. I have a slew of them. I love Belvin. I started out reading more recently with romance, Christina C. Jones. I think I went through her catalog so fast and just devoured it that it made me say, okay, let me pull back from her and start seeing who else is out here because I am really just, allowing her books to monopolize all of my time. So that's kind of what made me branch out to listen to and read Love Belvin. So I would say right now she may be my favorite author. However, Miss Kennedy Ryan, no, I can't. I'm sorry, love. Kennedy Ryan has to be the GOAT, the greatest of all times. I am proud to say that she started out traditionally published, then went indie, and her books are so amazing that the traditional publishers came to her. And so she's part of that. I love to say that indie Black romance community that just got so hot that they picked her up. They snatched her up, and now she has movies and shows coming out, and I love it. So Kennedy has the top spot. I'll just stop there.
So we talked about this off air, but I recently, within like the past month and a half, so six
Mhm.
weeks, have gotten into Black romance.
Let's go.
As a result of you, I will be getting into Black Wanderlust romance. Um, and it's my reading time is taking up all of my days these days. And the first books I started with were Kennedy Ryan's two books in her Skyland series. So this could be us and Before I Let Go, and they are phenomenal. When I tell you, I read both books in one day, and these are romance books are not short books. These are 400-page books. These are 400-page novels. They are so good, and I'm so proud to even hear that she went indie, and she's doing a damn thing right now. I'm currently reading. I'm looking at my book right now. A Love Song for Ricky Wilde by Tia Williams, who I know Kennedy Ryan says she was inspired by. So, for all my Black Girl World travelers, Black romance is where it is at. And I would love that you talked about book talk on TikTok because I know TikTok gets a lot of flack, but book talk is one of the best things to come out of TikTok because
Mhm.
that's how I got into Black romance, seeing all of the authors listed. And I think that, what do you think the importance of romance? Because I know for me, I am, becoming more creative as a result of reading these books. I'm becoming more positive and hopeful because Black women can get their happy ending. So I love if you could share your thoughts around like romance, what it does for your creativity.
Mhm. So let's tie it all back to TikTok. So let's start there. I don't know if you remember, like over the pandemic, the time that we all had so much time just apart. And TikTok became this magical thing that took all of our time, right? One of the things I will never forget about that time is the vitriol between Black men and Black women. And if you only listen to that, you would think that Black love was a concept or a construct that was created by someone on planet Venus or Mars, and we would never ever experience it. And I found myself because of COVID being bored, listening, and then having to say, this is not my target audience. I write romance. Like, what am I doing? I felt like I was starting to become brainwashed by listening to it. And it also made me question if they're talking, I can't even say they, if we are talking men over here about Black women and women over here about Black men, but you never saw in the middle where they were talking together, I literally said, I need to double down on what Black love is. Enter the perfectly imperfect Black woman. Again, even listening to TikTok and some of these negative talks that are going on, Black women are too strong. Black women are too opinionated. They think they're alphas. They don't need men. I don't think I know a single woman who has ever said that before. And so I'm trying to figure out where the talking point came from. So guess what you do? When you have hate, you fight hate with love. When you have contention, you try to bring togetherness. And so with my Black romance stories, they are super blackety Black romances. My job as an author is to fight that vitriol with real stories, relevant, relatable stories that actually end in a happily ever after, but don't depict the Black women as these superheroes, because we don't have to be. In many cases, they are successful, but they are also just as lovable. They have their stuff together and sometimes they don't. And they're still just as lovable. But on the flip side of that, the men I write to, they are the same way. They have their own stuff too. Kendrick Kekoa in my first book, Bali Blue, is a single father. And his daughter's mother, they have a contentious relationship. He loves her to death, but he just can't be with her anymore because she's on drugs. And that's not a huge part of the story, but it also tells that these are still relatable characters that have, and he's a CEO. So, and he has a beautiful daughter, and he meets this woman who doesn't have a child, and she just went through a divorce, and they have their stuff, but they still figure out, even long distance, how to love each other. And it's possible, it's doable. So you fight that vitriol with the actual vision of what it is and what it can be.
Beautiful. I love that. And fight it with facts. Black
Fight it, fight
women
it.
and men can have their happy endings. And yes, it's all about not falling for the traps of the internet.
Don't fall,
Yes.
fall.
So we have
Oops,
the
oops.
Wanderlust romance series. We started off with Bali Blue. I want to give the second book some love before we go into Tempest Tulum. So can we talk about the second book in the
Second
series?
book. Yep. It is all about Andra and Kobe's love story. Interestingly enough, this story started coming to my head while I was on the plane going to Bali to research Bali Blue. Yep. And so if it took me 3 years to write Bali Blue, then that story was percolating for probably 4 years before it got finished. Um, it is about Andra Baines, right, who is best friends. This Bali Blue is enemies to lovers. This story, Mess on the Mar, is an actual best friends to lovers story. Two people who met at the age of 13 and they were centrally pulled together over their shared love of African food and culture. Now, Andra, her family, her mom, single mom, raised her in Atlanta, Georgia. And Kobe's family came from Ghana. They were immigrants from Ghana. And at the age of 13, they were in middle school. He comes in, he's the new kid. And of course, the first thing that happens, he's this little skinny, little scrawny Black boy, and he gets beat up. And Andra, going through her own little middle teenage crisis, whatever teenagers go through at that time, she sees this happening, and she beats up the bully for Kobe. And so that all happens in the prologue of the story. You kind of see how their friendship was formed. Fast forward almost 20 years later, Now they're in their 30s and they have taken their love of African food to a whole brand called Gastrofreak. And Gastrofreak stands for African Food Freaks. And so they have this Instagram following, just hit 5 million followers. They're mega influencers now, and they just got picked up for a TV show as well as a restaurant deal. And so that's where the story starts. And the whole story really is about how two friends hold on to all the things that made them friends in the first place, but also continue to grow individually. And so Andra goes to Kenya, and there's some other things that tie into Kenya. She's willing to go to Kenya because she knows that her father, who she doesn't know, is Kenyan, and she's ready to go. But Kobe, she has been his hero, sorry, since they were 13. And now he's like, oh, well, we were supposed to go together. And now you're going, and he can't hold her back. And so he has to do his thing. She has to do her thing. And they discover that, guess what? Everything that I was ever looking for was already at home. And so she goes around the world to discover that her best friend is actually the love of her life and the only man who's ever been there for her all this time. And so it's a fun story. It does sound a little emotional, and I think it is. I think I tap into the emotional relatability. There are so many young women out here who grow up without their fathers, right? And then jump into the dating scene of a place like Atlanta where dating is brutal. And I think this kind of helps that vitriolic story that we were just talking about on TikTok. But the thing about it is, once you start discovering self and growing, you can grow above that vitriol. And Andra started out as, I don't have no love for no man. All they could do for me is take me out so I can do my influencer thing and write my reviews about these restaurants around town, and I'm done with them. And then that's how she went through life. Kobe, her best friend, kind of, tried to hold her down until it got to a point where he couldn't. And then again, they separate and then they come back together. Best friends become lovers and mess on the morrow. It's messy.
Love that. So I know you said you had the idea for the book when you were on the way to Bali. How do you think to weave characters in, one book for a future book? And I'm thinking about this a lot because I just read Kennedy Ryan's for the first 2 books of the series, and she talks like every book is standalone. You don't have to read them in order, but you should, kind of, in a way.
Sure.
And I noticed, I'm just like, oh, she mentions this is in the first book. Like, how do you have that foresight, and how do you write that out?
Ooh, that's such a great question. So like I said, I started thinking about Mess on the Morrow while I was literally on the plane. So you know how when you fly a long distance, no matter what airline it is, it's those big old jumbo planes where it's usually like 4 seats, then 4 in the middle, then 3 over here. It's a lot of seats. Well, it just so happened that where I was sitting, and it was in coach or main class, as Delta calls it, right? I'm sitting in coach, and there's this beautiful couple, Black lady, Black guy. They walk up and they're like, hey, those are our seats over there. So of course I have to stand up so they can walk across, climb across. And all I kept thinking was, God, they're gorgeous. They look, that's a really good looking couple. And I'm excited because, I'm writing a romance, right? And I'm all up in every couple's business. And I couldn't wait. We were flying from Atlanta to LAX, and then I was going to fly on to Sydney, Australia, then into Bali. I don't know where they were going at that point. Just knew that we were all going to be on the flight for 4 hours to LA. Finally, the flight is in the air. I hear them chatting, and I'm being a little nosy, and I'm like, okay, let me just jump in this conversation. And I'm like, hey, how long have y'all been together? Y'all are a stunning couple. They were like, oh, we're not together? That's my best friend. And I'm like, tell me more. How is it? It's so hard to date these days. How is it that these 2 gorgeous people are only best friends? I was like, it's got to be more to this story. They're like, no, we've been really good friends. As a matter of fact, I live in Atlanta. Actually, no. She lived in Senegal from Atlanta. She was on her way to LA to talk to a TV producer about a show, a food show in Senegal. You see the connections? So I see these two beautiful couples. And of course, we talked, we chatted. It was a great conversation. And when I got to LA, they went their way, I went mine. And it stuck in my head. What, number one, would cause a person to move from Atlanta to Senegal? Usually it's the other way. You would think it would be the other way around. But not with her. She was like, I'm out. And he's her biggest fan, biggest supporter. And the other question that they left me with is, how can these two beautiful people be both single and not be dating each other? And so the whole idea of the friends to lovers romance came together. I don't know where the name came from, but by the time I was finished writing Bali Blue, I had already written the female character for Maison de Mara onto the plane with Rian, who is the main character in Bali Blue, and they're seatmates. And they're both on their way to LA for whatever reason. I'll let the readers figure that out in Bali Blue. But that was the introduction of Andra Bainswright in Bali Blue. I fleshed the story out and answered those two questions. What would make someone move from Atlanta to any place other than the United States? In her case, it happens to be Kenya. And what would make two very beautiful, very single, very grown best friends remain best friends and not become lovers? So Maison de Mara answers those two questions.
So, Black World Travelers will have to read to answer those questions. But I love it. I love the detective aspect of connecting the pieces. So let's talk about the third book in the Wanderlust romance series, Tempest in Tulum, which is coming out November 14th. Who is this book for? And can you give us a sneak peek into the plot of the book?
Absolutely. So this book, I've already stated, Bali Blue, enemies to lovers, Maison de Mara, friends to lovers. This new book is strangers to lovers, and it is a sports romance. So they don't know each other at all. It is the story of Delia and Okio. I'll start with Delia first. Delia makes her debut in Bali Blue as Rian Carson's assistant, and they all work at an architectural firm. Okio makes his debut or his cameo in Maison de Mara in Kenya with Andra as head of family security for the reason, one of the plot twists in Maison de Mara. He's an ex-MI6 agent. I already said head of family security, Black James Bond type, Sigma male, very protective, bodyguard type guy. Keeping in mind, Andra is from Atlanta, and her and Kobe from Maison de Mara, their restaurant now has blown up. They have a Michelin star. That makes all of the family and cast and crew from Kenya converge on Atlanta, where that is kind of the meet cute, the restaurant. This is tying all the books together, by the way. Bali Blue, Rian Carson is the vice president of an architectural firm, commercial development, and her firm developed the billion-dollar project where this Gastro Freak restaurant actually is located. So now they're all at this Michelin star party celebrating the success of the restaurant. In comes Delia, in comes Okio. They meet for the first time. Remember I said it's a sports romance. Little Miss Delia is an architectural assistant by day and an MMA fighter by night. Okio, head of family security, is totally blown away by her grace and some of the things she's doing to sidestep the unwanted attention of one of her fellow co-workers. And he's just standing back watching like, oh, wow. She just did a classic feint, the ghost step, and he's just watching, being entertained. And then he thinks, the only people I know who can do this kind of stuff and that stealthy are usually some type of agent or operative like myself, or there has to be something else to her story. Either way, he's intrigued. And so the whole story starts out with her attacking him at a party. and the meet cute is almost a choke slam. So it is a high stakes sports romance and high energy from beginning to end. And how they get to a happily ever after, again, your followers are going to have to read it, but it is the cutest, angstiest story I think I've ever written.
And how did you choose Tulum as a location?
I went to Tulum. I knew I was going to write a story there, and I already talked about it. Kind of informed what kind of story it was going to be. When I went to Tulum and visited all of the ruins, I was like, this looks like a training ground. This would be a perfect training ground for something. And I was already thinking about Okio and his Black James Bond essence. So I kind of got this visual of him running up and down these steps of these ruins, or doing some kind of high speed chase on a boat for whatever reason. That did not get put into the story, but definitely there's a lot of training on those ruins. And it, number one, brings the two main characters together with a shared goal, this looming fight that Delia is preparing for in Mexico. And he has taken on the onus of becoming not only her kind of master teacher, protege, or I'm sorry, mentor, and she'd be the protege. He's become her trainer, but he also takes her to this secluded place where they could focus totally on her training. But of course, it wasn't just training going on in this secluded, beautiful villa in Tulum, Mexico.
Beautiful. So we'll have to read to find out all the spicy details. Now that we've had this conversation, I need to read all three, and I want to read them in order. But tell us about Tempest, about where we can find Tempest Tulum, and any special events you have coming up to celebrate the release, because the release is coming November 14th.
Absolutely. And so hopefully we can share it with your listeners. That scene I described at the beginning where Akio is watching her do all these delicate moves and their meet. There is a free dramatic reading of the entire first chapter that you can download and listen to, of course, at no cost. Hopefully, it inspires every last person who listens to it to want to understand more about these characters and this story. In this free dramatic reading, you're going to get not only the voice actors narrating the story, but it's also sound effects. There's Afro beats playing in the background. You can hear where a glass gets knocked over, it tinkling and shattering. You get the full immersion of the story and the full introduction of how these characters meet and what's to come in the book. Also, with that download to that dramatic narration, it's 40% off of the pre-order of the book. We're doing that. And then also an invite to Cher in Wonderland, which is the virtual launch party for Tempest and Tulum. So all of that coming up November 14th at 7 p.m. So if you can share that link, they can all get access to all those things I just talked about. The book itself is available for pre-order on Amazon or anywhere else you can buy books, but also on my website. And the best price, of course, will always be from my website at the link that I just described.
So, can you share the link? This link will also be in the show notes, but can you share where folks can find you and connect with you?
Absolutely. So if you follow me on Instagram, if you follow me on Facebook, TikTok, all of it at CHER_TERAIS. That's Cher Terais on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, any social media platform. But of course, TikTok and both Instagram have the links in the bio. If you click on my link in the bio or click on the link that you provide, you can get access to all those things that I just talked about.
Thank you so much, Cher, for coming on to Black Girl World Traveler, the podcast, to share about your newest book, Tempest Tulum, and about the Wanderlust romance series or genre that you have coined and are the queen of. So, Black Girl World Travelers, make sure you connect with Cher Terais. Read her books. We are so excited for your newest book launch on November 14th. Thank you so much, Cher, and thank you to our listeners, Black Girl World Traveler. Peace.
Thank you for
Thank you for
having me.
having me.